Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before the use of closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on but no bedding, running water and a toilet, and enough food to keep all of them alive for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained about their problems, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a much darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about their circumstances and the events that led them to where they are now, and they started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and begun alternatively whispering into the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects' incapacity with them. At first, the researchers suspected that this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of the 5 started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued, attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behaviour is how the other captors reacted to it. Or, rather, they didn't react to it. They just continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captors started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captors took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped, and so did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days had passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were still working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captors. They used the built-in intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They were afraid they were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response: "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out amongst the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of their loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and the soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream even louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they caught a glimpse of what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although nobody could call their condition life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the centre of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had also been completely ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could seem to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh, that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber, and alternatively begged and demanded the gas to be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers also lost their lives, if you counted the ones that killed themselves in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living test subjects had his spleen ruptured, and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative, and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point that there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word "more" over and over, weaker and weaker until finally he fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a new medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas to be kept on and for them to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have all of his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given to prepare him for the surgery. He fought ferociously against his restraint, which he had anesthetic gas was brought to put him under. He managed to tear through most of the 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force of his own muscles he had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of the 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery. He only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic, and they did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempted to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presided stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had been seeing the patient's mouth curl into smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to speak while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well. although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralysed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they had been wanted to give them the gas. Only one response was given: "I must remain awake." All 3 subjects restrained were reinforced and were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed their stated goals of the project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everybody's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip they were going to be put back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all of his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he was suffering from brain damage, before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep. Then it flatlined for the last time, as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatline as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both test subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes. He turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the last subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks with you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralyze when you go to your nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free." Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start out as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ship would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying they weren't actually from the Bahamas and they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's what the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's palace. Near the beach side of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney had begun construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the centre of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals, and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversially undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes. They turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposed for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. The group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace and jungle and loincloths not only in the centre of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by a security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took the community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses was razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anybody could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort from the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in, and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was actually complete. Visitors actually stayed at the restaurant. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic, and the usual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. Then, it all just stopped. Disney shut it down, and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious, and a wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the palace another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours away from Emerald Isle, so really I only heard the rumblings. I didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from somewhere who experienced the Treasure Island resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking the place. People there just felt as angry as hell about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus there were rumours that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting into is the blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could snag at home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time getting in there, because honestly it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get up to going to Emerald Isle. Of course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place that had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place, or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place. even though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there laundering their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather the words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World. I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it, I just shoved it in with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it into. But I did find it. Locals were of no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in the recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the island. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the restaurant. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet metal, some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." Clearly the handiwork of some past local, or an employee who wanted to make small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set out on foot. The inner grounds of the place was just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged amongst piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bud-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentified material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into an empty space with a silly toothy grin as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur and vines had snared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't been peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping mole where they had been, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace: forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. And the inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually thought people had stole the mouldings off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty chaos chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed all the way over to the locations that might seem interesting in any way. The kitchen was, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep, with all of its appliances in spaces. No expenses spared, every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed every porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of ranky, stinging, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd is the toilets and the sinks, and the bidets in the ladies' room. Yes, I went there. All dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really thought I heard a quiet conversation coming out, though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. A short unknown reply. I didn't know that I did that. Your father told you. Unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought I might have been something running in the room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed it up there and probably would have knifed me. I took a few deep breaths and slapped to my own face to get myself right in the head again. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down, unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet, or haul myself up onto the desk of questionable variety. I've seen some horrid stuff here, and I hate it all. I'd seen some stairs near the palace's lobby, and decided to have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd been accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led down below ground level, using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight. I could see that the staircase entered in a metal mesh door with a padlock, a sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there, not even the vandals or the looters. Nobody did. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantonly steal. I'd come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted, because hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third, fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or even broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force onto it. The clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. I eventually reached a black and yellow striped door with the words "Character Prep 1" stenciled onto it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this is probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle I tried, I could not open that door. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. There was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the centre of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back on the centre of the floor, like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotting and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the colouring of the costume. It was a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse, black where he should be white, white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I reached for a headpiece of the Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wild-eyed, mouldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there before my shoes was a human skull. It had stared out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained. I had to take a picture of it, you know. I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you didn't think it through. I needed proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start. Even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whatever was inside of it, stood there at the centre of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no, no, no," over and over again. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and my legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim at the opposite creature now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the deadly pixels spread, mirroring the screen wherever Mickey's outline managed to move to. When the camera died, it went black, quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Wanna see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck, with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. It worked its digits into its neck. So much blood. So much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tear of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by gods. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity if not for my very life, I knew the reason why Disney never wanted anyone to know this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions range from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remain powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, The collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dated between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all the cases, the stories were identical. I'd been in contact with a member of the group and was able to get some excerpts from their up-and-coming book, A Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it is necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have been introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke I saw his form, and once again awoke and I heard his voice. I looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next experience. I can't ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 most personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have seen his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. A Mariner's Log, 1961. He came to me in my sleep from the foot of my bed. I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall never return here again, at the request of the Rake. From a witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family from the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m, I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologised and told him I thought he had gotten out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural. It was as if he had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned to its condition. At this point, I somewhat under the assumption we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed, then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed, until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on its knee and sprung towards the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he would hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter, Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was badly injured and spoke once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." Being a small town, the news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son, Justin, and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had had a similar story. We had got into contact and begun talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now refer to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal entry had an entry saying that the creature in its first 3 pages. They never mentioned it again. The ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the rig. That was the last entry in that log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through my room through the silence of me rolling in each bed every day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the record at 8 times the normal speed. This tour still took me almost an hour every single day. On the first day of the week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the rake. I can't listen to it long enough even to begin to describe it. I haven't let anybody listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when I was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the rake since he ruined my life, but I know he's been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring right at me. I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remember during a particularly vicious era, when the bombings rarely stopped, I would stay at home sitting in front of my TV, watching a very, very strange show. It was a kids' show that lasted about 30 minutes. It contained strange and sinister things. To this day, I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on part of the media to use scare tactics to keep kids in place, because the moral of every episode revolved around a very, very uptight ideology of stuff like bad kids stay up late, bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep, and bad kids steal food from the fridge at night. It was very weird, and in Arabic to top it all off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every single episode. The camera would zoom in an old iron rusted door. As it got closer to the door, the camera would zoom in. Strange and sometimes even agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then a text would appear on the screen in Arabic, reading, "That's where the bad kids go." Eventually both the image and the sound would fade, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 to 16 years later, I became a journalistic photographer. That show had been on my mind all my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually, I'd had enough, and decided to do some research. I'd finally managed to uncover the location of the studio where that thing was filmed. Upon further research and eventually travelling to the site, I found out it was desolate and had been abandoned after the war had ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burnt out from the inside. Even a fire had broken out, or someone had wanted to incinerate all the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studios and snapping pictures, I found an isolated out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to break the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood, feces, and tiny bone fragments lay scattered across the floor. It was a small room, and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me though, what made me turn away and never wanted to come back, was the bolted caged microphone hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the room. There was a hunter in the woods, who, after a long day of hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, He decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached, and he found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable, making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces. He turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. My girlfriend Emily died on August 7th, 2012. I just received another message, and it's worse than the others. She was involved in a 3-car crash, driving home from work when someone ran a red light. She was dead within minutes of the scene. We have been dating for 5 years at that point. She wasn't big on the idea of marriage. It felt archaic, she said, gave her a weird vibe. But if she had been, I would have married her within 3 months of our relationship. She was vibrant, the kind of girl that would choose deer every single time. She was happy when camping, but a total technophile too. She always smelled like cinnamon. That being said, she wasn't perfect. She always said things or something on the lines of, "If I cark it first, don't just say good things about me." I've never liked that. If you don't pay me out, you're doing me a disservice. I've got so many flaws and that's just another part of me. So this is for Em. The music she said she liked and the music she actually liked were very different. Her idea of affection was a side hug. She had really long toes, like a chimpanzee. I know that's tangential, but I don't feel right without you having an idea of what she was like. Em had been dead for approaching 13 months when she first messaged me. This is where it began. I had left Emily's Facebook account activated, so I could send her the occasional message post on her wall, go through her photos, and it felt too final, and too un-Emily, to memorise it. I share access with her mother, Susan, meaning her mother has her login and password, and I spent a total of 3 minutes on the account, all total on a computer. After a little confusion, I thought it was her. I had received confirmation from Susan that she hadn't been on Em's profile since the week of her death. Em knew a lot of people, so I thought it was one of her tech-savvy friends fucking with me in the first way possible. Around February 2014, Emily started tagging photos with me in it. I would get notifications for them, but they'd normally be removed by the time I got the photo. The first time I actually caught one, it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. She would tag herself in spaces where it was plausible for her to be, or where she'd usually hang out. I've got screenshots of 2, from April and June. These are the only ones I've been able to catch, so they're a little out of timeline and I'm trying to work it out. Around this time, I began to lose sleep. I was too angry to sleep. She would tag herself in random photos for every couple of weeks. The friends who noticed it thought it was some fucked up bug. I found out recently that there have been friends who have noticed and didn't say anything about it. Some of them even removed me from their Facebook friends list. At this point you may be wondering, why didn't you just kill your Facebook profile? I almost wish I did. I did for a while. On days where I can't get out there, it's nice to have friends to chat with. It's nice visiting Em's page when the little green dot isn't next to her name. I was already socially reclusive when Em was alive. Her death turned me into something pretty close to a hermit, and Facebook and MMOs are my only real social outlets. I sent what I assumed was Em's hacker a message. "Why are you doing this? Why do you keep tagging her?" On March 25th, I got an answer. It wasn't until a few months after going through these chats that I had discovered she was recycling my own words as well. My responses seemed kinda lackluster. I was intentionally providing him/her with emotional bait. This is actually devastating, to keep them interested in the game. I was working off the assumption that the kind of person who would do this is the kind of person that thrives off the distress of others. I was posting in tech forums trying to find a way to find this person, contacting Facebook. I need to keep them around to gather evidence. I had even changed the password and security details several times. I received this. I had discovered any leads. Facebook had told me the locations her page had been accessed from, but since her death, they're all places I can account for. My house, my work, her mum's house, etc. My response here wasn't bait. Yo, ask Nathan was an inside joke that's too lame worth explaining. But seeing her say it again was absolutely fucking crippling. My reaction in real life was much less prettier. Her last couple messages have started to scare me, but I wouldn't admit it until this point. I don't even have words for what she said. Freezing is the first original word she's said. This has given me nightmares, and it just won't end. I keep dreaming that she's in an ice-cold car, frozen, blue and grey. I'm standing outside the car door in the warmth, screaming for her to come out. She doesn't even realise I'm there. Sometimes her legs are outside with me. I wasn't really drunk. Em wasn't an affectionate girl, and it always embarrassed her to exchange I love yous, cuddle, talk about how much we meant to each other. She was much more comfortable with it when I was drunk, and I pretended to be drunk. A lot. Her reply is what prompted me to finally memorise her page, thinking I might put an end to this. It might seem innocuous to her previous message. It's from an old conversation where I was trying to convince her to let me drive her home from a friend's house. In the collision, the dashboard crushed her. She was severed in a diagonal line from her right hip to midway down her left thigh. One of her legs was tucked onto the back seat. Going back in time, these are messages I sent her the day she died. She was usually home by 4:30. This, alongside a couple voicemails, is the last time I talked to her, onto the assumption that she was still alive. You'll see why I'm showing you soon. I memorised her page a few days after the message about walking. Until today, she's been quiet. She hadn't even been tagging herself in my pictures anymore. I don't know what to do anymore. Do I kill her profile? Or what if it is her? I feel like I want to puke. I don't know what's happening. I just got a notification. I heard the alert sound. I'm just too afraid to swap windows and check it. I checked the alert, and I heard it. It was all compiling all this together. This was the message. That's my door. That's my computer. I got the message 3 hours ago. I didn't want to check it until now. I'm legitimately scared. I've got no idea who took this photo. I'm on my tablet in my garage, zen for now, going to drive to friends. Forgot to open the carriage door in my panic, so building up the nerve to get out to do that now. I've always wondered who was behind those costumes. I was unfortunate enough to find it out when I took my son on his first trip to Disney World. Being a single father isn't easy. I work as hard as I can to provide for my child, but I need to make enough free time to be there for him. It's a rough balance that I, and many others, struggle to maintain. It's so rare that I get a chance to spend the entire day with my boy, or that I get a break from the stress. So when an opportunity arises, I try my best to make it a reality. So when my son David happened to come across a contest that boasted the chance to win a family package to Disney World, I set my sights on making it happen. His glee, while he filled in the necessary information, was almost enough to make my heart melt on its own. I wasn't naive. Things like that don't happen to us. After losing her, I've learned that you can't count on things to work out for you. After David submitted his form, I started to scour my work schedule for any opening I could take and still be there to provide. Earlier mornings got earlier and my workload increased tenfold, but it would all be worth it. That's what I thought anyway. The contest ran for a month and a half to give people time to send in their entries and me time to save up for 2 tickets. I stayed up on a night and had printed a mock-up letter stating that David had won the contest, stuffed it inside of a white envelope and placed it ever so gently inside our rusty mailbox. Then all I had to do was wait for him to come home. When I tell you this boy's whole world lit up like the 4th of July when he opened that letter. Man, I hope I never forget his smile. I thought he was going to damn near rip his cheek open grinning that hard. We set a date on where I could get the 3 days off work that I needed. Even though the trip was still a few weeks away, David was all packed and ready to go the night he received the letter. He told me about how all of his friends was jealous, never ever questioned why the family pack only consisted of 2 tickets. I couldn't speak for all parents, but Disney World was miserable. It was far too hot, and within a few minutes of walking around in the unrelenting sun, I could feel my sweat clinging to my clothing. David wanted to see every bit of the park that he could. He would run up to every mascot. I could tell he was getting flustered with the ones that couldn't talk back. I could tell it was going to be a problem. I love the boy, but he isn't great at letting things go. So I guess most children are like that. The park was loud. My feet started to hurt as we stood for unreal amounts of times in line for one ride at a time. I wasn't there for me though. I was there to spend time with David and watch him immerse himself in all of his favourite movies. Still though, despite me trying to explain the mascot's silence, he continued to protest. I would have to walk up and pull him away from the silent animals. One day, David reached forward and grabbed onto Goofy's hand. The expression on David's face dropped, and he walked back to me. His hand feels weird, he said to me. I looked up at Goofy. I didn't care. They could be as animated as they wanted, but the unmoving face always gave me the creeps. The way they can just stare forever. We didn't engage with many after David got creeped out, and I couldn't really get an explanation out of him. We still had far too many things to see anyways. We couldn't be stopping to talk to every make-believe character. David's mood slowly returned as we feasted on a monstrously expensive meal and went on a few more rides. We sat together as the sun had long since passed the horizon and watched the fireworks leap into the air. Their brilliant spectacles of colours and booms filled the park, and despite all of my complaints, there with the boy, it truly was the happiest place on earth, and I would have been picture perfect if it wasn't for all the mascots that stood around us. With every glow of the various colours, their features were outlined, they'd fade into the darkness. It was eerie, but I was glad that David hadn't gotten scared. Once the grand finale sent a seemingly endless stream of fireworks cascading into the sky, filling it with bright, sparkling lights, I noticed the mascots had left. Then the fireworks ceased, and our only lights were the spare place lamps around the park, and after a bit more time of walking around, it was time for us to leave. David said he needed to use the bathroom, so we started our search, but the crowd was flowing like a river towards the exits. I was bumped on my shoulder, and turned to face a man who gave me a quick apologetic glance. That was all it took for David's hands to slip loose from mine. Looking back, I noticed I was alone. My head frantically swiveled, searching through the crowd. My voice raised above the surrounding chatter as best as it could to try to call his name, and when I didn't hear a reply, I started pushing against the tide. My exhausted body brushing up against an ocean of others as I tried to find a clearing, hoping the herd would thin out. My breath and my heart started to race in tandem, as seconds felt like an eternity. Getting near the back of the pack, I could hear a distant and timid "hello" swimming under the conversations around me. David. It was David. I looked around like a madman, and once only a few people were surrounding me, I could see under one of the lights was none other than Mickey Mouse. Of course, I thought, David would want to say goodbye to Mickey if he saw him. With the crow and the crowd dissipated, I quickly jogged to the oversized rodent and noticed that David had a small collection of tears under his eyes. I promptly asked him what was wrong, and he said that Mickey won't say goodbye to him. The last thing I wanted was for David's final memory of the park to be a negative one. All he wanted was a goodbye. I stood up straight, looked the mouse in his saucer-sized black pupils, then back at my son who was wiping his cheeks. Slowly, I stepped forward and leaned in towards the mouse's ear. I did my best to keep a whisper my son could hear. "Hey, I know you're not supposed to. Even if it's the worst impression, please just say goodbye." There was a moment of silence, and when I didn't receive a response, I started to pull away from Mickey. "Daddy!" David chimed in, and when I turned my hand, I noticed that Goofy had closed in on us. Looking back to Mickey in the dark, when I stared into his pupils, it seemed like the dark they were made of was swirling. I told David that we should get going, but he said he wanted a goodbye and grabbed Mickey's hand. Mickey grabbed back. The grip must have been strong, as David immediately started to struggle against it and screamed for me. "What the hell?" I shouted towards the rat. I reached out to grab Mickey's arm, and when my hands made contact, I understood David's previous statement. Weird was the only word I could come up with too. Whatever was under the costume was much skinnier than a person should be. The mass I grabbed onto felt like it was constantly shifting around my hands. I wanted to leave the park, but I also wanted to give my son fond memories of it. I didn't want things to go physical. I turned to look at David, but instead of being able to focus on calming him down, I noticed Goofy was walking closer towards us. The illumination above us cast completely on the front of Goofy, and the costume fabric was writhing, like hundreds of fingers were under the costume, all pressing on the inside of it. That was enough. I'd just buy the kids some damn ice cream and be on the way. "Let go, or I'm gonna hit you," I warned. I was tired, but the thing under my hands didn't feel like it had any muscle to speak of. Yet, I continued to struggle. David's cries echoed in my head. I reeled back and threw a punch towards the cartoon character's head. I thought it had completely come off, but it was just hanging off its shoulder, held together by a thin back string. A string that was moving around to pull the head back into place. Mickey's grip loosened, and David was able to wiggle free. But me, I could feel two light brown arms wrapping around me. "Run to the exit, David!" I exclaimed as I wrestled against the dog trying to hold me in place. "That's enough," a sweet voice commanded, and in response, Goofy pulled away from me. I adjusted my gaze towards the female that saved me. "Sorry, nighttime is feeding time," she spoke. I was beside myself as I looked into the face of Sleeping Beauty. The actor stood under the lamp across the path with her hands clasped together. Mickey and Goofy stepped away from us. Mickey, now with his head back on his shoulders, stepped into the shadow. Sleeping Beauty walked towards us with an unwavering smile. "We have to take care of our young, don't we?" She spoke, looking at David but clearly addressing me. "What's your name, little guy?" David looked at me and back to Sleeping Beauty. "David?" Sleeping Beauty lowered herself to David's eye level and gave him a nice toothy smile. "Goodbye, David," she spoke, soft and kind, with one of her hands reaching out to hold David's hand. "And good night." Raising back up to meet my stare, she continued her almost inhuman smile. "You're gonna want to get that off you." She pointed at my arm. There was what I thought to be a strand of hair resting on my bare arm. What I thought was hair then spread out and seemed to multiply until it was a scraggly clump with thin strands reaching out. I felt a small prick as a number of strands seemed to trickle and wriggle their way into my paws. Quickly, I raised my other hand and grabbed the mass. As I pried it from my arm, the strands continued to brace into my skin. With great enough effort, the tendrils were snapped loose and I chucked the mass to the ground before it could latch onto my hand. The clump moved across the tiled road until it found Sleeping Beauty, who bent over and let it rest into her gloved hands. She nodded, and with that, I grabbed David's hand once more and pulled him towards the exit. His tears were gone, and all that was left was a satisfied grin. I offered once more to look back as we got to the exit. They were all there. Each mascot we had come across that day stood in the dark, watching us leave. Our drive home was long. Quick for David though. He passed out in the passenger seat clutching one of the souvenirs we had purchased. I tried to get the images out of my head on the ride home. Each stray strand of hair in the car sending me into a mild panic until the wind pouring in from the windows whisked it away. I think that was what most was disturbing to me, even as horrific as the fur mascots were, being held together by whatever the hell was inside there, was Sleeping Beauty. Her calm and collected attitude, and most unnerving, when she flashed that toothy grin to my son. The light above us perfectly bounced off those pearly whites, and the black strands that were poking out from the small gaps in her teeth. David has never brought it up, despite me asking if there was anything he wanted to talk about, and he only reminisces about the positive experiences of the day. I'm not sure if we'll ever go back, but if we do, we'll be sure to leave before closing time.